Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. It's a declassified document, okay? And it comes from the very top of the U.S. military. And what it lays out? Well, it's a plan so shocking, you're going to have a hard time believing anyone ever took it seriously. And here it is, right at the core of the plan. We're talking about the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top military leaders in the entire country, proposing a full-on terror campaign on American soil. I mean, detonating bombs, staging fake attacks, and then pointing the finger at another country. It's just, wow.
So that's the billion-dollar question, right? Why on earth would the generals in charge of protecting America come up with a plan to attack it? To lie to everyone? It seems completely insane. Well, the answer, believe it or not, comes down to one big, nagging problem they just couldn't solve.
And that problem was what Washington called the Cuba problem. You have to remember, this is the height of the Cold War. The Kennedy administration, the Pentagon, they were absolutely desperate to find a solution. So what was the Cuba problem? Well, it wasn't just one thing. First, you had a successful communist revolution, led by Fidel Castro, just 90 miles from Florida. I mean, right on their doorstep. He kicked out a dictator who was friendly to the U.S., and then he started nationalizing all these industries that American companies had been making a ton of money from. But the real kicker, the thing that kept everyone up at night, was the fear that Cuba would become a military base for the Soviet Union. And that, during the Cold War, was a non-starter. Now, to be fair, they didn't just jump straight to this crazy plan. The U.S. tried other stuff first. You know, the usual things, economic sanctions, trying to apply diplomatic pressure. But when none of that worked, they started to get, well, a lot more aggressive. And this is where you can really feel the frustration building. The first few attempts to fix the Cuba problem weren't just failures. They were absolute, public, humiliating disasters. Okay, let's just walk through this timeline because it really shows how things were spiraling. First up, April 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion, a total catastrophe. Then you have Operation Mongoose, this massive, secret CIA campaign. We're talking sabotage, propaganda, even dozens of plots to assassinate Castro, including trying to hire the mafia. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And yet, by early '62, after all of that, nothing. Castro was still there, as secure as ever. So after one embarrassing failure after another, the Joint Chiefs basically threw up their hands and said, okay, that's it. They decided the only option left was a full-scale U.S. military invasion. But there was one huge problem. They had no good reason to do it. The American public would never go for it. And that's how they landed on this idea, a false flag operation. It's pretty simple, really. They knew that nobody, not the American people or the rest of the world, would support a random invasion of Cuba. So they figured if there isn't a good reason, we'll just create one. They decided to stage a bunch of fake attacks that would make everyone furious and give them the perfect excuse to go to war. Which brings us right back to that original document, Operation Northwoods. So let's dive in and look at the actual, specific, and frankly, bone-chilling ideas they came up with. The whole plan was built around a few core ideas, and they were all designed to create, and this is a direct quote from the memo, a helpful wave of national indignation. The strategy was simple: cause chaos and terror, and then make absolutely sure Cuba got the blame. So idea number one, let's blow up one of our own ships in Guantanamo Bay. And get this, the memo actually calls it a Remember the Maine incident. They're openly referencing the event that was used to start the Spanish-American War. They were literally planning to pull the same move from over 60 years prior. Unbelievable. Okay, but then it gets even worse. The plan moves onto U.S. soil. They propose staging a terror campaign in American cities like Miami and Washington, D.C. We're talking about setting off actual bombs, injuring real American citizens, and then staging fake arrests with planted evidence to make sure the news media ate it up and blamed Castro. It's just so cynical. And this really shows you that nothing was off the table. They were perfectly willing to target innocent civilians. The plan suggested faking hijackings of passenger planes, maybe even shooting down a civilian airliner, and then just pinning it all on Cuba. But maybe the most wild, most Hollywood movie part of the whole plan was to fake an entire dogfight. The idea was to stage this elaborate scene to make it look like Cuban fighter jets, totally unprovoked, shot down a U.S. Air Force plane. It was this incredibly complex and dangerous lie, all just to start a war. So,
The Joint Chiefs write all this up, sign off on it, and send it to the president for his approval. The military is basically ready to roll. And what happens next? Well, it's the most important part of this entire story. President John F. Kennedy said no, flat out. Operation Northwoods was dead on arrival. It never happened. The plan was stopped right in its tracks by the civilian leadership, which, thankfully, saw it for what it was, completely insane and totally unacceptable. But it's really important to understand what this no actually meant. This wasn't JFK disagreeing with the goal. He wanted Castro gone just as much as the military did. The argument here was about how to do it. Think of it like this. They all agreed on the destination. They just had a massive fight about the map. Kennedy, who was still feeling the burn from the Bay of Pigs disaster, thought this plan was way too dangerous. The military, they thought it was their last best shot. And that brings us to the really scary takeaway here. Yes, the system worked. The checks and balances held. But man, did they hold by a thread. The United States was literally one man's signature away from its own military attacking its own people just to start a war. Let that sink in. Now, it's easy to look at Northwoods and think, oh, that was just some crazy Cold War thing. But the core idea, the tactic of painting an enemy as this huge existential threat to justify going to war, that's not old. That's timeless. The specific words might change, but the playbook, it looks awfully familiar. And that leaves us with a pretty chilling thought to end on. The machine, the political and military structure that came up with this plan, it's still here. It hasn't really changed all that much. So you have to ask yourself if the right people in power felt a threat was big enough, and if you had a president who was willing to say yes instead of no, could a new Northwoods happen today?